Hello, everyone. So, as usual, I welcome you to our YouTube channel, and this is the 12th video of our YouTube channel, which is dedicated for the Vipassana meditation. So, I don't know whether you are aware of this, in Buddhist practices, in Buddhism, we have two main modes of meditation. One is called Vipassana, and the other one is called Shamatha. So, in Shamatha practice, our primary focus is on achieving the calm abiding nature, and it can be achieved in many different ways. But the Vipassana has become so popular in both Western and Eastern countries alike, mainly because it's a unique kind of practice that was introduced by Buddha when he became enlightened and when he came to the final realization. So if you look at the Gautham Buddha's story, so I think approximately 2500 years ago, he was born in India, and then when he turns about, let's say, 26, he went searching for the ultimate truth, and then he came in contact with many different yogis at that time in India, the prominent figures who had the mastery or the expertise in chakra activation and chakra meditation, and also attaining and absorbing into deep meditative concentrations. So we call them form and formless absorptions. So if you are not aware of these meditative insights and absorptions, I ask you to refer to our old videos. So our old videos in our channel, they basically provide the required prerequisites for this video. So Gautham Buddha came to know of these yogis who were experts in these meditative attainments, and then Buddha also practiced meditation under their guidance for several years, but then he was unable to come into the liberation, and he was unable to be free from suffering. And then later, after spending so many years, after doing self-reflection for so many years, then he came up with this new type of meditation technique called Vipassana. So that is the uniqueness of the Vipassana meditation, and you don't find the attributes of Vipassana meditation in other religious traditions. So that's what actually we are going to talk about in this video. But then instead of talking and then sharing the theoretical information or the canonical information to the watchers, what we're going to present, what we're going to elucidate is the practical information, more of the things that we understand, the things that we realize, and things that we come to understand with the help of our practical engagement in the Vipassana meditation. So this is what we are going to talk about in this video, and I hope that it will be really useful for many people to be free from suffering, and also to be free from the never-ending human consciousness. So what I'm going to share in this video is more of the things that I have understood and realized after practicing Vipassana for some time. And in addition to that, we have our lineage teachings, and also I'm sharing and combining some of the teachings from, let's say, some prominent figures like Venerable Mahasi Sayadeva and Venerable Balangodananda Maitri. So the Vipassana practice, as I mentioned earlier, is all about being aware of your thought process. And all this suffering that we encounter in our lives, impulses, anxieties, and many other mental factors, even the emotions, negative emotions. So they can be simply reduced or observed as thoughts in the sphere of our human mind. And this observation sort of gives us a detachment to all these mental objects. So when we become aware of all these impulses and negative emotions and all these activities that we observe from the five senses, at the same time we bring our human awareness to our thought level, then due to this awareness, with the aid of this awareness, we continually maintain a separation between all these impulses and emotions and the human mind, so that there is always a distance maintained. So this is one primary mode of doing meditation with the help of Vipassana. Being aware of all your mental objects, thoughts, and your own thought process. And this activity is actually happening in the conscious layer of your mind. In most of our previous videos, we mentioned that hypothetically, the human mind can be divided into three parts. So this separation or this hypothesis is pretty similar to Carl Jung's hypothesis. And we are giving a hypothesis to this context only to explain the nature of our mind, just for the sake of analysis. Otherwise, we won't be able to explain how the mind operates, because some people claim that the human mind actually doesn't exist. But then, for the sake of explaining and analysis, we are bringing this hypothesis onto the table. So, being aware of all these mental objects and the sensorial contact or the mental fabrications, so that actually takes place in the conscious layer of our mind. So that's the topmost layer. So the conscious layer of our human mind is the part of our mind that aggregates or accumulates or collects data from five senses regularly. And the subconscious layer is the layer underneath under the conscious layer, so that it can only become active when the conscious layer is asleep. So for an example, when people go into bed and when in the middle of their sleep, they usually go into this the dream state, where all these subconscious memories and subconscious information come into the surface and they become activated. So the unconscious layer is the last layer. That's where you have all these deeply buried memories and things related to your addictions and also your past life memories, such and such. So the basic mode of Vipassana, as I mentioned, it's related to your thought process in the mental sphere or the conscious layer of your mind. And practicing Vipassana and doing this continuous reflection on about your imagination, your memories, and your thought process, and how the sensorial contact happens in you. So that's really helpful for you to keep the distance between you and the things that can trigger you, the things that give you suffering. And at the same time, it is really useful for you to be free from suffering, and at least to train yourself to not to get identified with the external objects, triggers, and suffering. So that makes sense. That is really straightforward. The second mode of Vipassana is a bit of advanced step, and that actually takes inward. The practitioner to the other layers of your human mind. So if you are a good meditator, and let's say you have been practicing meditation for a long time, and if you can deeply absorb in your meditative samadhis, at some point you will come to witness purity of your mind. So that can appear as clear light, that might be visible to you as an ultimate clear light. But there are two versions of the clear light. One clear light that emerges from jhanic states, but the clear light that can emerge to you due to the purity, due to the uncovering of the purity of your mind, is what we call the fruition mind. So this fruition mind may also appear to you in the middle of your meditation practice. So when you have the first glimpse of this fruition mind, it may appear to you for a certain period of time, and then you will get absorbed in that meditative samadhi, and then after that you will lose the grip of it. The fruition mind will disappear to you. So what is the reason for disappearing this fruition mind? It's because of the resurfacing of the mental defilements, or what we call the fetters. Because our mind is usually contaminated with a huge heap of fetters, or the mental defilements, and in almost all the religious traditions, people are talking about purifying our mind. So in Buddhist practice, the approach is more of a technical approach, and this is what we call Vipassana. So in the second mode of Vipassana, what we do is, one time we go into the meditation, and then we go through these jhanic states, and then we come to this fruition mind, where the purity of your mind comes into your meditative site for a short amount of time, and then you try to get absorbed in that for a long period of time, but then at some point it will disappear because of the remaining mental fetters and defilements. So as soon as this fruition mind disappears, the mental fetters come into the surface again. And these mental fetters or defilements may appear to you as, let's say, some mental images. Let's say now, if you have a mind that is contaminated deeply with, let's say, lust or anger, then all the mental objects that are appearing after the first glimpse of this fruition mind are related to these attributes, these tendencies. So as you can see in this video, depending on the fetters, depending on the defilements you have, a correlated mental image will appear during the meditation, so that you know what's still there in your mind, what's still there in the deep corners of your mind to be refined or to be cleansed. So that knowledge, noticing that, is also we call it Vipassana. It's the second mode of Vipassana. So to recall what we discussed earlier, in the first mode of Vipassana, it usually mainly takes place in the conscious layer of your mind. That is what we usually do in our wake-up state, or in the wakeful state. So in the wake-up state, we come to contact with many different objects in the outside world, and sometimes these objects can trigger us. It can lead us to suffering. It can trigger anger in us. It can bring sadness into us. So we become aware of all these triggers, impulses, and emotions. So we maintain a distance between all these at the mental sphere from ourselves, and then that gives less suffering. The second mode of Vipassana, that's something that we do in the middle of our meditation, when we are deeply absorbed in our jhanic state, and then when we come to the fruition mind. So if you like do the second mode of vipassana, and when you do it for a prolonged period of time, more and more you become aware of all these mental fetters and defilements resurfacing. They tend to disappear. And then when more and more you are contemplating on all these resurfacing mental images and memories, they tend to disappear. Because what happens is all these tendencies and mental images, emotions, they are simply like, hiding beneath your conscious layer of your mind. And when you bring your focus or the human awareness during your meditation, during your samadhi, so these thoughts that are acting like, thieves who are hiding their face behind the conscious layer, and they have no room to hide anymore, so then they start to disappear. So that's how our subconscious layer actually works. So that's how, very subtle the thoughts in our human mind are actually working. Now the nature of our mind is as follows. So you have, let's say, in your mind, within the all three layers of your mind, you have the thoughts, the gross level thoughts running in the conscious layer, that's the topmost layer. And then you have a bit of a subtle level of thoughts running in the subconscious layer, and extremely subtle mental chunks that are running in the unconscious layer. So the latter is not even observable, and only deeply concentrated meditators can notice them during their samadhis. Well, the nature of all these thoughts is that when you bring your awareness into the thought, when you bring your attention into your thought process or the thought chain, these thoughts will lose the intensity in them. These thoughts will lose the base energy that is fueling these thoughts. So this is the trick of Vipassana practice, and it is similarly applicable to all other the mental subjects, including emotions, impulses, sensations. So that's the thing. Now in the third mode of Vipassana, that's a bit of a critical stage in our practice. So the third mode of Vipassana comes when you're getting into, let's say, a certain spiritual trajectory. Let's say right now you are only interested in the normal Vipassana meditation and getting trained yourself in the meditation practice. But then at some point, after realizing the impermanence in this world, and also you lose the interest in all these mundane activities, and then you want to change the direction in your life, and then you come to do Vipassana regularly, and then at some point you are getting into a path, let's say the Buddhist training path. And once you come to the path, you are being continually monitored by the path checkers, or what we call there are certain beings or certain, let's say, energetical or higher dimensional beings. When they choose the path for you, then you come to this path and you are being fixed in that path, then you are being continually tested, and then you are being regularly monitored of what you do and how your mind works and how your Vipassana practice actually works. So, I mean, we usually say that like there's a pool in this training. There's a line of succession or line of practitioners, in this Vipassana training. And when you come to that line or the pool of training, then you have to be really careful, because then the monitoring or the observability of your thought process becomes even more critical, and there are more challenges. So all these challenges, tests, are usually incurred by these higher dimensional beings, but they do it for your own benefit, because you have to progress in your path. And then as a good Vipassana practitioner, as someone who is genuinely interested in attaining nirvana, then you need to know about certain Vipassana knowledge, certain Vipassana attributes in order to progress in the path. And that is the third mode of Vipassana meditation. And I think in this video we bring the highest emphasis on that part. So that is what I am going to explain from this point onwards. And most of these Vipassana knowledge attributes actually come from the canonical studies. And then I hope that this knowledge will be useful for you to also incorporate in your daily life, so that it will help you first to be free from your suffering, and on top of that it will reveal you the nature of your human mind, nature of the operation of our human mind. Now let's take a particular example for the Vipassana practice, and to showcase its effectiveness in someone's spiritual evolution. So in this case, I'm taking a trajectory of a highly evolved spiritual being who has come to, or who is traversing through his dark night of the soul. And during this dark night of soul period, it is quite typical for the darkness of our mind, the traces of our ego, to come into the surface, or to come into the conscious layer of our mind. So then what happens is these the leaks, or the subconscious and the unconscious leaks that are coming to the conscious layer. So they can be sometimes terrifying, they can appear as mental pictures. Sometimes the meditators are said to going through a lot of difficulties, fear some wrathful forms. They are sometimes tend to notice them during the sleep. And not only that, on top of that, during also the meditation, they start to experience these kind of visions. So when these visions appear, when the ego is starting to decline, how should we treat them? How should we accept the situation? Now for that, we need the Vipassana knowledge. If you don't have the Vipassana knowledge, then we don't know how to treat them. Now, depending on your level of maturity, your level of spiritual hierarchy, the dark night of the soul period that you have to pass through, I think it can be relatively intensify. It can intensify, and then the intensity of this period depends on the level of the spiritual aspirant. So if you are in the level of an ascended master, of course the ego, the reflection or the depiction of your ego can go up to, let's say, so many wrathful forms, and they may appear in many demonic figures. So for an example, if you are a Tibet Tantrayana practitioner, of course you would notice the mental images, or some subconscious and unconscious formations similar to Mahakala. So this, as you can see in this video, the Mahakala image actually came into the existence because of that. There is no such demonic figure or the demon called Mahakala, but that's how our ego is coming into our attention during the dark night of the soul period. So the Mahakala form is a wrathful form. So it represents 5 poisons in us, because essentially our human mind is contaminated with five poisons. But then at the dark night of the soul period of, let's say, an ascended master level, you are traversing through all 3 mind layers, so that it can the dissolution of your ego can really get intensified. But then how should we cope up with the situation? Well, I think the Vipassana practice comes in to help you in this case. So you have to simply, without having any fear, you need to observe all these demonic or dreadful forms, and then try to understand that all these forms are just reflections of your own mind and the reflections of your own ego. So in Buddhist tradition, I don't know whether the people who are practitioners from Mahayana and Tantrayana lineages are familiar with this term, but in Theravada tradition, we have this special term called crossing over the ocean of defilements. So this crossing over these defilements, or the crossing over the ocean, it simply signifies the settling of the mud, settling of the dirt in clear water. So when you're looking at, let's say, a contaminated water, then you cannot clearly see the depth or what's in the depth. But then if you let it to settle for some time, then after clearing out the water, you will start to examine and clearly see what was there in the depth of your water. So the same thing is happening with our mind. So you have to let your mind to settle, so that all the traces related to your ego, subtle traces of your ego, will start to diminish, and then the true nature of your mind will be seen. So the important point is not to get agitated, not to be upset with all those wrathful forms or the demonic figures, because they are essentially representing the features or the qualities of your own mind. Okay, now let's try to summarize about the Vipassana practice and the Vipassana meditation. So as I mentioned at the very beginning of this video, Vipassana is a unique meditation technique that we find in Buddhist tradition. So Gautham Buddha, the founder of this tradition, well, he came up with this technique, and then he expounded this to the followers, a larger audience. And then the Vipassana can be effectively used in many different layers of your mind. So the samatha, or energizing your body, activating your chakras, you can get it done from even with the help of an external source. Like if you go to a spiritual guru, master, energy healer, they can support you energizing your energy system, vibrations, and your chakras. But the Vipassana meditation, it's simply up to you to do. So it simply boils down to your own practice, your own contemplation, your own effort. So it's something that we have to do by ourselves. So as it was explained, the Vipassana meditation is a threefold practice. So in the first method, we are simply trying to keep a distance between our thoughts and ourselves, so that we maintain this awareness, so that we do not get identify ourselves with our thoughts, impulses, emotions. So we always keep this distance. The second mode of Vipassana, I think for the second mode, you can only come to that point after improving your meditation, after developing your meditation to a great extent, so that you can easily absorb in these meditative trances, samadhis, and then you can get into this clear light states, so that you have the possibility to purify your mind. And this is a non-karmic state, it can also accelerate your spiritual progression. And while you are immersed in this meditative trance, there could be defilements, fetters, mental fetters coming into the surface from the subconscious layer. So this is something you have to be aware of during the meditation, and slowly analyze them and notice them so that you can understand the true nature of your mind, your character, your profile, and then let them diminish, and then let them settle to the deepest layers of your consciousness. So when you do that during the meditation, the purity of your mind or the clear light trance will be deepened, and then it will become brighter. And the third mode of Vipassana is where you have to be really you have to be really careful of what you do during your practice, because the third mode of Vipassana comes into play when you have come to a specific spiritual trajectory. In this scenario, in this context, when you become a Buddhist monk and when you enter the path, so that your practice and the Vipassana meditation will be monitored by the path checkers or the hyperdimensional beings. So you have to be really rigorous during this training. But then at the same time, these hyperdimensional beings also might have some confusion about the spiritual trajectory. So this is something that we have to discuss, in a separate video. But nonetheless, these are the three modes of Vipassana training. Well, now, usually we believe that the mind, human mind, is a result of 5 aggregates, or the data that we accumulate from 5 senses. However, there is more to that. There is more to human consciousness than the data that we're gathering from 5 senses. For an example, during the dream state, we started to usually notice, many different stories. We have these dreams appearing during the sleep. So then, mind seems to be still active. Mind seems to be still working during the sleep. So then, during the sleep time, all our 5 senses are closed and they are not exposed to the outside world. So then, how do we get the mental pictures? How the mind runs all these narratives during the sleep? So that's a question that we should ask ourselves, and therefore we need to understand that our human mind is a complicated process. It's beyond also the data that we accumulate from the 5 senses. So then, in a nutshell, we can conclude that the mechanism of our subconscious and unconscious layer is much more complicated than the conscious layer, so that there's a sort of like divine connection to these two subconscious and unconscious layers to the universe. So most of the people, perhaps including also the watchers in this video, are familiar with the Vipassana that we usually do to the conscious layer. And this is what we usually do to be free from suffering and to have like mental peace, calmness. And this is what we try to achieve by keeping a distance between the data that we accumulate from the 5 senses and our mind. So this is the usual practice. So by highlighting this information, we are concluding this video. And then to give you a summary, well, now, when we are in a closed eye meditation, we can go into subtle mental states. We can go into subtle meditative states or samadhis. However, that can be, really blissful for a meditator. Some people can be even immersed for several days. And we have heard of such yogis living in India, in remote areas, perhaps for an example from Himalayas. they are said to be immersed in these type of meditative states. However, still we can be, having suffering from external activities. We can have still suffering due to, let's say, the things that are happening outside of us. They can be influencing our mental state. So then, even though you are immersed in deep meditative samadhis, perhaps what is happening to you is simply a spiritual bypassing, and there is more to that than really developing your Vipassana meditative awareness. So having less suffering and also developing a meditative awareness that is not contaminated with the outside world is the primary goal in Buddhist practices. And in Buddhism, we specifically talk about such fusion states where you follow the Buddhist path for some time, and then due to your training, you will come to certain stages in your meditation practice where you will be free, or you will become free from the five aggregates or the mental contaminations, and therefore you would have less suffering. By the way, in addition to that, I would also like to mention that by activating higher chakras in your body, for an example, when you activate the 6th and 7th chakras, that too might bring you mental peace and calmness. You will feel like, okay, now we are having less troubles and we have less contamination to the outside world phenomena, to the outside world problems and objects. However, that is not the exact freedom that we usually trying to gain from Buddhist practices. In Buddhist practices, by cutting through mental fetters, by being free from five aggregates, we try to achieve an irreversible freedom, which is not similar to the peace and calmness that we try to achieve by activating the chakras. So there's a clear distinction between, there's a clear difference between the peace and calmness that we achieve by activating our chakras and by cutting through mental fetters in Buddhist meditation practices. Well, a while ago I mentioned about entering into a specific spiritual path, and that path was the Buddhist path. And then what would happen to the practitioner when they enter into this path? Well, as I mentioned, now when you are in the middle of your path, your progress will be monitored by many hyperdimensional forces. So what does it mean? Well, if you want to really learn about and deeply study about hyperdimensional forces and hyperdimensional metrics, well, you can search it in Google and you can find plenty of materials. So these are the path checkers. So under the observations of the path checkers, then you have to walk along your path, and then you will come across many challenges. In Buddhism, we often speak about mental fetters or the defilements. And under the observation of these path checkers, you have to cut through, or you have to overcome these mental fetters one by one. So one of the such mental fetter is what we call the self-identity. So the self-identity is the identification or the clinging that you have towards the five aggregates, or we call them name, form, perception, sensation, and the consciousness. So this is the main source of suffering, main source of suffering that we identify in Buddhist tradition. So due to these five aggregates, due to the clinging to these five aggregates, we have this ever-running consciousness, ever-running thought process, so that you cannot be free from the mental loops. So the first step, and in my opinion, one of the most challenging step to overcome in this practice is to be free from the five aggregates, or to be free from the self-identity, so that this is one of the biggest hurdle that you have to get over, surpass. And after going over it, then you come to train your mind for the other mental fetters. So in Buddhist practice, we usually say that eradication or being free from the ego self starts from the five aggregates, starts from the self identity, and it eventually ends at what we call the conceit. So if you ask from any Buddhist monk about the Theravada practice training, Theravada meditation training, we say that the ego identification is actually swaying between these two extremes, the self-identity and the conceit. So eventually you will end your practice and you will come to the end or the full liberation at the end of the practice by going over, eradicating both the self-identity and the conceit. Yeah, so these are the very specific things that I wanted to highlight, and in addition to that, some other specific defilements such as identification with lust, fear, anxieties, all these issues will be corrected, or all these issues will be eradicated by the rigorous training in Vipassana. So this is what we need to understand. And by giving this information, I conclude this video so that you have the information related to the Vipassana training across its full spectrum. And in the next video, we'll be looking at the Vipassana knowledge or the Vipassana wisdom that we can learn from the canonical studies, so that I believe it will be really useful for any meditation practitioner to understand the nature of human consciousness and to understand how deep or how to what extent the Vipassana training spans or dives in Buddhist training. And with that, I conclude this video, and if you have any questions related to these practices, if you want to get clarified certain meditation techniques, and if you have questions related to any of the content we have been publishing so far, please add your comments, ask your questions below, and do not forget to subscribe to all our videos. Thank you.